Welcome to class, everybody. Professor Pete. It's week 4, lighting and rendering. And this video, we are going to talk about camera because this is very, very important. And I'll show you some tips in terms of how to then render based on animating the camera and different camera positions. So first things first, how to create a camera, just in case you don't remember. Over here on the right-hand side, there's a standard camera. And make sure it's set to physical. Click and drag. And now, as I click and drag, I can change the aim position. So there, it's fine. Hit spacebar so that way we can position it. So let's talk about positioning the camera first. And so I'm going to go to physical camera. It's my second camera. And there it is. I can move it around this way. It's a little bit slow. You're going to want to move it like this. You can select the physical camera and the target over here, and that's easier to then move the whole camera and the target situation. And as you can see here, it doesn't update as well. I'm really kind of surprised. But as I'm putting this thing together, I can then hit spacebar and have a look at it. Under the physical camera itself, you want to show safe frames, so that way when you are rendering, you're going to see what the viewport sees. Alright, so there it is. Alright, so I'm going to position this, and I can go under the modifier, and then I'll talk about the camera attributes for it. But I'm going to go ahead and go to that camera, and I'm going to say that this is what I want. So I'm going to hit S on the keyboard, and that creates a keyframe there. This is going to be really useful, and I'll show you what I mean by this, because we can have it render out 5 to 10 frames. Every frame is a different camera position. So that's going to be really useful for us, so that way we don't have to sit and tell 3ds Max to render when we can just have it render a number of frames, and it's all different angles. So let's just say this is going to be my first shot. It's going to look something like this. So there's the tree, there's the lamp, bit of the projector. So I've keyframed, hitting S on the keyboard for this particular position. And then the second frame, or frame 1, we can then grab this, and I have auto keyframe turned on, and so now I can, I'm just going to select both of them, and I can maybe move, over towards the car, and I'll need to hit S on the keyboard, but auto keyframe is turned on, so that's fine. It'll create keyframes for me. Looks pretty good. So rule of thirds also, in terms of camera work, put the car in the lower part of the rule of thirds. And if we were just to scrub between the two, we should end up with, this physical camera here, and then physical camera on the second frame. So again, you can see how we can start playing with the camera and then render out a number of frames. Now, the other thing too is we can go to the physical camera attributes and change things here. We can change the presets to 35mm up to higher. We can change the focal length of the lens, and we can change the aperture. We can turn on depth of field, and when we do that, when we turn on depth of field, you'll notice that the camera, just on the top view here, you can see there's 2 additional lines. So the center line here for that camera will be in focus. Otherwise, I can turn off the enable depth of field, and you can see that it just goes away. So let's talk about the camera itself. So the physical camera is supposed to simulate a real, single lens reflex camera, and in this way, let's have a look at the focal length and the aperture. Those are the 2 main things. So I'm going to just show you a couple examples. First off, with the focal length. So focal length, when we think of wide angle, this is a wide angle. It's because it's warping on the corners. This is a lens that's roughly 10 millimeters. And the lens is about a 20 millimeter. And you can see that because of the warping that's happening with the mountain. Yeah, that's like a wide angle lens, so you get more of the mountain. I actually got this shot on my phone. So my phone had a super wide angle lens. It might have been even a 9mm that was on here to shoot this shot. Here's an example of a zoom lens. Again, shot from my phone with a special lens on top of it. I was able to flatten the shot, and so you can see that if you put 10 millimeters as your camera, and instead of putting So if you put 10 millimeters on the camera lens instead of 100, you'll see that the warping that happens, you get more in the shot versus 100 millimeters. But the 100 millimeters at the same time will flatten the shot pretty nicely. So that is the main difference for focal length. Now when you combine that with aperture, let's have a look at some examples with that. Now here is a picture, my cousin shot this for me. She was using a 1.4 f-stop, so lots of light coming in. And when you have lots of light coming in, especially a low aperture like this, you can really create an incredible bokeh. So the bokeh that you see in the background, that kind of blurring is done naturally through the camera lens. So when you increase the f-stops, okay, so the 1.4, it's very low. It brings a lot of light in, and it creates very, very blurry backgrounds. If you put it to 20, then this works better for landscapes because then everything is going to be in focus. And so that's the main takeaway for this. This is an 85 millimeter portrait lens. So at 85 millimeters, it flattens the image, right, like we were talking. And then coupled with the 1.4, creates incredible bokeh, just like you would see in portrait mode on the latest iPhone. That's how the same effect you get from a big physical camera. And so, again, if you want to have a very, very clear background on this type of lens, you'd have to set the f-stop to very high, 22 or higher, and that way the background will also be in focus. So that's the main difference with the physical camera. And so there you can enable the depth of field, and then you'll be able to get that pretty well. You can change it to custom if you want a custom focal distance to be in focus, but it doesn't seem to work as intuitively as you would with just a target distance, because you can see the target distance in this sense. Now that we're done talking about the camera itself and placing the camera and putting in different frames, that way we can more or less output the animation, we can go and look to the render settings and we can save the file and we can save the range. Okay, so let's say we have 5 different screenshots of the room, and instead of just hitting render once, instead of hitting render 5 times and waiting for that render to finish, we can have it set to a range and it'll output to the number of frames you want. So let's say we want 4 or 5 or 6, it'll render out a range of 7, and we want to set to save file, and save file will allow us to then give it a name and a location and a file type. For me, I'm using JPEG, and once hit render, it'll render out every single one of those files. So I've already set the output type, and so I call it test, but you should just put your name in, project 1, and make it to a JPEG. And once you hit save in the location, that's going to be really important. And then when you hit render, you'll see them come out. And so I was able to do that, and again, just to purpose of time, these are really low quality renders, but they both appear. There's test 000 and 001 already in my folder. And so again, you can see how much faster you can save time this way by just set it and forget it. Come back after a few hours, and all your renders will come out in the same folder, and those will be what you would submit. So again, that's camera for you, and I hope you found that useful in setting up really cool cameras and placing them. All you need is one camera, and just make sure you animate it frame by frame so you can have those single frame shots in your output renders. All right, hopefully that was helpful. See ya later.